The decision to retire early for some people is a massive leap of faith. There's a real emotional charge about making the decision, especially if you're doing it early, because there are so many people around you that are going to tell you, why are you doing that for? What you're going to be doing all day? Haven't you got a mortgage to pay? Shouldn't you be working hard for the future and all of that? My kind of view is the future is now. So how do you manage that kind of leap of faith? That's what we're going to talk about today. I remember years ago when I learned to snowboard, I did it about once, in Whistler in Canada. The snowboard instructor was some kind of Californian surfer dude who kind of came up to Whistler in the winter to teach snowboarding. It was so hard for everybody that there was nobody left when we got to day 3. Can't have been that good of a snowboard instructor because everybody thought, no, I'm out, this is getting too crazy for me. And it ended up just being me and him at the top of a mountain in Whistler. But I just thought, yeah, let's go for it. And I remember he said to me once, after everybody else had kind of left the course and it was just me as he took us up to the high part of the mountain, he said, hey, dude, man, you gotta scare yourself every day. And I was a bit of adrenaline junkie back then. And I kind of thought, yeah, I know what you mean. There's a kind of thrill about scaring yourself, taking that leap of faith. And whilst I've never done a parachute jump or a bungee jump, I've done some sort of similar things. There's like a thing called a sky drop. I remember in Las Vegas where you get hauled up about 500 feet in the air, and then you pull a lever and you just swing down on a kind of rope. But you're the one that's got to pull the release cord. And everything in your body is telling you, what the hell are you doing? Every emotional part of your brain is saying to you, what the hell are you doing? This is completely wrong.
Let me tell you something. All right. Let me tell you something.
And yet, the logic in your brain is going, no, it's all right. I've checked, thousands of people have done this thing. All the wires have been checked. Everything's safe. They wouldn't allow us to do it if it was dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And so you have that conflict in any leap of faith, don't you? Where the emotional part of the brain is sort of saying to you, what the hell are you doing? And then I used to do some stupid things when I was at university, in college, which when I look back now, I think, oh my God, you could have really hurt yourself. And I was just doing it for kicks and laughs, trying to impress people because I wasn't afraid, or, maybe I was just stupid. I don't know. But when you get older, and especially when you have kids, with kids, oh my God, I feel like a kind of a reverse Terminator. I see danger everywhere when my kids were younger. I'd see a door open, I'd think, oh no, fingers in the door. You'd see a plug socket open, oh no, fingers in a plug socket. I was crazy. So yeah, now I'm older, very wary and sensible about going up a ladder. When I was younger, it's like, yay, whatever, because I just know that things hurt a lot more. Your emotional brain is there to sort of protect you from these risks, and retiring early is a massive risk, or at least the thought of it is a massive risk. And other people around you are saying, why would you want to do that? What are you doing that for? And then you also, your own self-doubt when you look around and, why is no one else retiring early, around me? Why is everybody else so obsessed about working until they're 65, 67? Now, look, I get it. For some people, no choice. And I think for me, that's how I felt for a long time, that I kind of looked at conventional wisdom. I looked at my pension fund. I did the maths and I thought, oh, damn, I really want to retire by the time I'm 60. But even then, I'm not sure it's going to work out. And I sort of just sat with that notion, that the better option might be me waiting until I'm 65 when I have more pension and stuff like that. But that wasn't the right decision from a kind of mental point of view, when I wanted to kind of embrace the chance of experiencing, a retired life, as it were, or life without work at a younger age, to get the benefit of it while I'm kind of young, fit and healthy, because you don't know. That's the big gamble in life, isn't it? Quit work and go and have an adventure now, or stay until I'm 65 and then at least my pension will be a lot better. But then you don't know whether you'll be in a position to enjoy it at 65. So yeah, making the decision to retire early is one of those big leaps of faith, especially when conventional wisdom, and when I mean conventional wisdom, I mean the majority of everybody else sitting around you, is sort of working until they're 60, 65, 67. And as I said, I get it. Some people don't have the choice. But then again, there are other people that do have the choice. And yet it's their emotional fears that are stopping them. And, why is that? The reluctance to take that early retirement leap, even when the finance aligns, stem from deep psychological mechanisms. There's a famous psychologist, I think he's called Daniel Kahneman, something like that anyway. And he talks about the kind of two elements of the brain. He describes it as the dual brain process. And I've seen similar things in a book called The Chimp Paradox by, I think, called Steve Peters, which I'll come to. But Daniel Kahneman has written books about decision making. And in it, he describes the kind of the two competing elements of the brain. He says, we can understand this is a dialogue or sometimes a battle between two systems of thought, the slow, deliberate, logical, and the fast, instinctive, emotional system one. And while system two might meticulously calculate your savings and investment returns and withdrawal rates and your pension, so you've done all the maths. I did the maths so many times, and yeah, I changed my model so many times, but I did the maths. And I looked at the maths. Every day I looked at the maths going, yeah, no, it's still coming out with the same answer. It's still saying it's okay to retire, yeah? But all these other noises around me were sort of saying, you sure about that? Is it the right thing to do? The maths said yes. The heart wanted to, although that's an emotional part. But the other emotional elements in my brain were sort of playing at me saying, well, I'm not sure you should be doing this. So system one is that fast, instinctive, emotional system. That's what keeps us alive. That's what kept the caveman alive. It's that instinct of fight and flight, the emotional thing. People see red mist and get violent. As Steve Peters describes it, it's that chimp brain, the animal brain in us, the emotional brain. And then the logical brain, Steve Peters describes as being the CPU. So you've got this constant battle between the chimp brain, the emotional brain, and the logical CPU. And I guess understanding that process can help us kind of with that decision overall. And it's not that one is better than the other, but that they need to be in a kind of a good balance. The emotional brain often can get you into trouble in a civilized society because you kind of, lose your temper or you get a rage, like a kind of enraged, angry chimpanzee. But the logical brain, slows you down. As cavemen, we were, instinctively, emotionally, the brain works to be scared of weird things, strange things, new things. That's there to protect us. System one is that fast, intuitive, emotional element that allows us to make decisions, on the quick without sort of actually thinking about them. They're kind of emotional, and it's the emotional element which is really, really powerful. System two is the slow, effortful, logical, longer sort of thinking process. And the emotions are powerful things, and it's often the emotional side of things which is the more powerful of the two. As I say, Professor Steve Peters sort of describes it, the chimp brain, it's very emotional. It's what drives anger and love and passion and all of that. And it's, very strong and can be very, very overwhelming. But we live in a different world now. And, the logical brain now in this more modern world is there to say, all right, Mr. Chimp, Mr. Chimp brain, you don't have to be that emotional. Let's think about this logically. It might be safe. And then it has a conversation, and hopefully the logical brain will guide you through it. When considering a major life decision, it's the, logical side of us, that logical system that we kind of hope to rely on to give us sort of focus and sanity and a vision and a sort of the truth, as it were, because, we're relying on facts and logic to hopefully control the kind of slightly more up and down roller coaster element of the emotional side of our brain. Whilst often we are still driven by our gut feelings and our emotion. And in fact, it was my gut and emotional feeling wanting to retire that sort of drove the decision into doing it, thus handed that responsibility over to my logical brain, my CPU, to do the maths, to reassure me, because all the anxiety and doubt about whether this is the right decision, especially in my position, I've still got a kid who's at school, still got to support him. I still had a mortgage at the time. How am I going to pay for that mortgage? And all of these questions. System one, the emotional system, often dominates because it's the emotional one. It's the emotional thing that drives decisions. You have all those doubts, leaving the security of a long-term job, a regular wage, the protective instincts that are there about, building a nest egg and all of those kind of things and looking after the family. Very, very strong emotional pulls. And as I said, everybody else sort of that I know of similar age still wanting to work or not planning to retire for, for years. And it's often the opinions of other people that kind of will sort of feed that doubt. And doubt is a form of emotion in a way that will feed that doubt in you, why you're doing this and all that kind of stuff. The other thing that the emotional part is saying to you is the fear of the unknown. Get used to doing a job, especially if you're doing the same job, or even like you say, in the same career for 20, 30 years. It's unknown, it's safety. Again, it's that emotional part of our brain that protected us as cavemen, from the kind of, saber-toothed tiger. I don't know whether saber-toothed tigers existed during the time of cavemen, but you know what I mean. The point is, better the devil you know, as they say. Taking a decision like early retirement is basically entering a new stage of life and shutting the door on something that you've been used to for like 20, 30 years. So of course, there is a massive fear of the unknown. As psychologists would say, and I'm quoting here from my phone, so I'm reading it, humans have an evolutionary predisposition to fear the unknown as a survival mechanism. As I said, early retirement plunges individuals into unfamiliar territory regarding daily structure, social life, identity, and long-term financial security. This fundamental fear can trigger anxiety and catastrophizing, imagining worst case scenarios. Oh my God, how many times do we imagine the worst case scenarios? That's our emotional brain trying to convince us, don't do it, this might happen. That, I can't watch an episode of Casualty in the UK. Anybody who lives in the UK knows what that is, because I can see the danger, the catastrophe that's about to happen. Or you start working out all the bad things. And sometimes life, when you're faced with a big, bold decision, that kind of catastrophizing element kicks in, isn't it? Like just thinking, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? Yeah, what if none of that happens? You know what I mean? What if everything's fine and you're just sitting in your garden, have a cup of tea and enjoying yourself? Then there's the anchoring bias, when we kind of rely on the first piece of information that we get, and then we don't kind of research beyond that. I mean, that's true of so many things in life, isn't it? And, often the first piece of information we get about retirement is the state pension age, being, as I said, 67 for men, and I think 65 for women, if it's the same yet. But the point is, then that becomes sort of our first piece of information. It becomes locked in our brain, and then we sort of live our life thinking, oh, yeah, retire when you're 65, retire when you're 67 or whatever. And then we just overestimate the importance of that piece of information because it was the first piece of information we got. But I didn't really understand how pensions worked, or how my pension worked, or that you could, release tax-free money and actually if I paid off the mortgage early, then I wouldn't need as much. My reliance on this sort of the money I needed was based on my outgoings now, not what my outgoings might be in the future, or what my outgoings might be if I eradicated all my debt and stuff like that. But I didn't research beyond that first piece of information. Again, it's that emotional side, that shortcut side, shutting down your decision, saying no. Computer says no, or emotion says no. So it is a real leap of faith. And it's at times like that, with that leap of faith, that your body is screaming at you, don't do this, it's not the right thing. Where if there's a part of you that really wants to do it, if the logic is saying yes, if the logic gives you the okay, the logic is giving you the thumbs up, then just do it. It's important to realize that the emotional decision shouldn't be taken out of the equation. I'm not saying that we should all turn into logical computers. In fact, that can be dangerous from a psychological point of view. I've always relied on being a very kind of logical, straightforward person. And sometimes that's meant that I've not necessarily dealt with the emotion in my life properly. I've used logic to kind of completely override the emotional element. You need that mix, that balance in the cake of emotion and logic, carefully balanced. As I said, we live in a world where we're constantly battling or trying to navigate between the emotional and the logical. And for me, it was the logical that kind of anchored me, kept me focused on the path. Every time I had a doubt about it, whether it would work or not, I went back to the maths. I went back to the logic. As I say, emotional is all over the place. My heart says, of course you should do this. Of course the romantic side of it. Grab this opportunity while you're sort of young enough. Okay, I'm in my late 50s now, but I wanted to enjoy the freedom of financial independence while I was young and healthy, rather than gamble on waiting. And yet, equally, that emotional side of me was saying, Oh, you should be sensible though, you sure about that? And it's feeding the doubt, that kind of white angel, little devil on your shoulders, constantly having a battle. That's the emotional part of it. Once I've sort of made the decision from an emotional point of view, I handed over responsibility to the logic, the CPU, the maths, and said, if you show me maths, because maths is pure, maths is true, if you show me this will all work out, then I'll go for the ride. And that is effectively, what I ended up doing. But there is no doubt about it. Retiring early, when I say retire early, I mean before the sort of conventional wisdom says you retire, in your 60s, or in the UK, we have a state pension age of 67 for men. It's constantly going up. Other people, your family, whatever, telling you, should you do this? Is it the right thing? If you want to do it emotionally, and you then in harmony with that, the logic, the maths says, yeah, you can do it, then you're on the right path. Now, look, I know on some of my videos, people say, some people don't have options and don't have the choices. And I'm very lucky because of the circumstances that have occurred that have allowed me to grab this opportunity. So I accept that. I accept that not everybody is in the same position as I am. Equally, there are many people who might be in the same position as I am. Having been driven to that place by your heart or your emotion, it actually might be something that more people can do than they realize, because it's about understanding what it is you need to achieve that security, to kind of minimize that risk. There's a risk that you just sit and do nothing and retire at 65, 67. Well, what if you do that? And then when you get to that position and you've got a nice pension, you've got some nice savings and they're all packed away so you can enjoy that life that you've dreamt of, you get to that age and then you're too ill to actually enjoy it. What would you do? What would you do? Take the money now that's less, but you can still live reasonably well and enjoy yourself while you've got the health, or wait for the bigger payday and gamble on the fact that you're still going to have that health or enough time to enjoy that money. Somebody on my comment went, well, I'm sorry, you're completely wrong about this retiring early stuff. Research says that people who retire early have a lower life expectancy. Well, research does not say that. I researched it and actually got facts. However, often research might suggest that because it's looking specifically at people who have been forced to retire early due to ill health. Okay, so inevitably, if you are forced to retire early due to ill health or because you've lost your job, you might be in a position where you are, depressed or you're ill, and your life expectancy might go down. But where you're in control of it, where you're choosing to retire early, there is research that was done in Germany and research done, I think, by a Dutch university as well, that actually says life expectancy in those that choose to retire early, not because of ill health, when you factor that out, you take that out, their life expectancy actually goes up because they don't have the stress of the job, the continuing in that kind of sense of there's no end, can work a long time in a job. And then if somebody said to you, like I'm 57, if somebody said to you, you can't retire until you're 67, that's another 10 years. 10 years. That's not like a short time. You think, I've already done this for 20 years. You want me to do it for another 10 years sort of thing. That's quite a long time to go. That's quite depressing unless you really love your job. And if you're in your 50s, the opportunities to maybe kind of go up, career progression is a bottleneck. I suffered it at my company. All the senior managers, all the managers that saying opportunities for us to go up a level become significantly more narrow the higher we get. And so they tried to address it by creating some new senior roles that people could kind of go into. But if you're in your 50s, you're probably as high as you're probably going to get. There's a thing called the Pareto principle, which you should look up about. People in their career reach the point of their ultimate incompetence or something like that. It's a sort of, you get really, really good at your job and then you get promoted, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be really, really good at that promoted job. You were really good at the job you had. Does not mean that you're going to be really good as a senior person in that job. You know what I mean? So in your 50s, you might be at the point where you've kind of reached the pinnacle of what you're going to do, especially in a world which is changing, with technology and stuff. Hey, look, I was far ahead of anybody else in terms of AI at my company and was into IT and tech. But come on, let's be real. If you're in your 20s and 30s and you're really career-minded and focused, you're probably much more onto a lot of those things. You know, like there's loads of kind of social media things, even though I do YouTube, that I'm not really into in the same way that a lot of, you know, that sort of Gen Zs are and stuff like that. And I hate to say it, but of a bit of a Gen Z world that we're living in. So yeah, you might feel a bit disillusioned that your career's not going anywhere. So the prospect of someone saying to you, you know, in your 50s, oh, you've got another 10 years of this. Another 10 years of grind. Yeah, the emotional part of you might want to say, you know what, I want that adrenaline leap of faith. I want that thrill. Well, if that's the case, then get your logic brain onto it. Start doing the maths, start planning, and see if that opportunity will arise for you. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about today. And I'm doing it in the garden because it's sort of raining a bit. But yeah, retiring early in the face of sort of conventional wisdom is a leap of faith. But emotionally, your body might say no, your heart might say no, even though another part of your heart might say yes. If the math says go, then go. Cheers. I hope you liked this video. If you did, then please hit the likes because I like it, YouTube likes it, and it helps people like you find content just like this. And if you're new to my videos, or maybe you've watched some of these videos and haven't got around to it yet, then do me the great favor, please hit that subscribe button, toggle that notification bell, and that way you'll know when I upload videos just like this. And talking of videos just like this, why don't you check out the videos right here? These ones here. Thanks.